Hey guys, thank you so much for joining us tonight at the Church at Visalia online campus. We have an awesome service planned this evening, and if at any time during tonight's message you have a question or a comment, feel free to join our live chat at the right side of the screen. Our service host would love to assist you and answer any questions that you may have. Here's Pastor Kevin with tonight's message.
Well, we are in week number 3 of a series called Bible Stories, and man, I love the Bible. I love what it's about. I love who it's about, and I love the stories of the Bible. The stories of the Bible, I don't know how familiar you are with the Bible or the different individual stories that are in it, but man, the stories of the Bible, they're incredible. I mean, there's drama in these stories. There's action in these stories. There's sex in these stories. There's romance in these stories. There's about every plot and twist and turn that you can imagine are in the stories of the Bible. And I love the stories of the Bible. And one of the things about the stories of the Bible is many times the meaning is like right out there in front of us. It is what it is. It means what it means. But then sometimes we read the stories of the Bible and we think it means this, but in actuality, it's showing us something completely different. And we have to dig a little deeper to see that. And then there's other times where it means something, not just one thing, but we can see 2, maybe 3, maybe 5 different things and scenarios that we can learn out of this passage. The stories of the Bible are so rich, there's so much depth to them, that we decided to take a few weeks and just unpack some stories of the Bible. But when you're reading the Bible, it's really, really important to read it in context and to try and see what the story is actually saying. Because like we said last week, we can get kind of off theologically if we read one part of the story and we think it means this. It could take us a complete way that God doesn't want us to go. And when you look at the stories of the Bible, there's one story in particular that I think about a lot, that it's the story of David and Goliath. Most of us in the room, I'm sure, even if you're not a church folk, you've heard the story of David and Goliath. And when it comes to the story of David and Goliath, when we read it, it's typically told to us kind of like, there's the Philistines on this mountain, and there's the Israelites on this mountain, and there's the mean 9-foot-tall giant in the middle of the mountains, down in the valley, and you've got the bad guys and you've got the good guys, and the good guys, they look down and they see this 9-foot-tall giant, and he's cussing at them and he's swearing at them, saying, "Send me a man to fight, and if he beats me, then we'll be your slave, but if we beat him, then you guys will be our slaves." And all of the Israelites up on the mountain, they're all like shaking in their boots, and no one wants to go down and fight. They all know they can't beat him. And then all of a sudden, here comes little David, and David says, "Hey, is there not a cause? I'll go down and fight." And he runs down into the valley, and he kills Goliath, and it's an incredible story. And when we read this story, we typically think, and yes, it does kind of show us this, but when we read this story, we typically think that in the story that we're David, and that there's this 9-foot-tall giant in our life, and maybe that giant is debt, maybe that giant is the past, maybe that giant is a bad marriage, maybe that giant is kids that are making us go bald, but maybe that's down there in the valley, and I'm David, and God's going to give me the strength to go down there with my slingshot, and I'm going to kill my Goliath and move on in victory in my life. And I guess it does kind of mean that, but that's not the story. The true story of David and Goliath, when you look at it, it's something so much deeper. It's a story about the redemption of humanity. That on this side you have death, hell, and the grave, and sin. And on this side you have all of humanity. And death and hell and the grave and sin is they sent down their captain. They sent down their leader, Satan. And Satan's yelling at humanity, "Send me somebody to fight me. Send me somebody to fight me. And if you can defeat me, then we, death, hell, and sin and the grave, we will be your slaves. But if I beat you, you will be mine." And we think that we're David in the story, but in reality, we're the Israelite people. We're shaking in our boots. We can't beat death. We can't beat sin. We can't beat hell. We can't beat the grave. And then all of a sudden, onto the scene comes a little baby named Jesus. And Jesus walks up into the hill and he says, "Is there not a cause? Are you not worth it?" And he runs down in the valley. And Jesus defeats the wicked one. Jesus defeats death. Jesus defeats hell. Jesus defeats the grave. Jesus cuts off its head. And he defeats sin for all of humanity. That's the story of David and Goliath. And that, it's cool that, hey, I'm going to have a great marriage, but this is the story of David and Goliath. It's much more profound than that. And that's why I love the stories of the Bible, is when you dig deeper, there's many of them are allegories. They're symbolic of God's ultimate plan for life, or what God wants to do in our life. Not just us, but all of humanity. And like the last couple weeks, we've been looking at different stories, and in the story of the 3 Hebrew children that we talked about in week 1, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. When we read this story to our children, and when we think about it at face value, it's that, hey, God's going to give us the ability to stand strong in a world that bows down. And if you have something you believe in, you need to stand firm and don't bow down to what everybody else believes. And yes and amen, that is what the story's talking about. But what we talked about is we unpacked it a little bit deeper, that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they show us how that we can never stand on our own. That in order to stand against the idols of culture and the waves and the things of culture, we have to frog. Remember that? We have to F, fully, R, rely. I'm from Indiana, I don't spell well. O, on, and G, God. Fully rely on God. That's what that story tells us. Is that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they fully leaned in and relied on God, and God helped them stand against culture. God helped them go into the fiery furnace. God's the one that saved them. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, it's really not about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego at all. It's about God and how we as individuals need to fully rely on God. I love the stories of the Bible. Last week we talked about Peter walking on the water. And when we read this story about they're rowing across in their boat, and all of a sudden the waves of the sea come and the wind gets contrary and the waves are up and down, and all of a sudden they see Jesus walking across the water, on top of the water, and they say to themselves, "It's a ghost, it's a ghost," and they're freaking out. Remember that? And Jesus says, don't be afraid, it's not a ghost, fellas, it's me. And then Peter stands up all brash. "Oh yeah, well, if it's you, Lord, tell me to walk upon the water." And Jesus says, "Well, come on, fella." Uh-oh. And so Peter takes a step out the boat, and he's looking at Jesus, and he walks on the water, and he walks on the water, and he's doing something he's never done before. He looks at the waves and looks at the wind, and he starts to fail. And then Jesus automatically picks him up and puts him back on top of the waves again. And we talked about last week how, yes, this story, it does mean that, man, that when you look at Jesus and you live for Jesus, Jesus is going to help you do things that you could never do on your own. Jesus will help you have peace in your heart that you can't have on your own. Jesus will help you have relationships that you can't have on your own. Jesus will take you to heaven, which you can't do on your own. When we look at Jesus, Jesus will help us do things that we've never been able to do on our own. It does mean that. But when we look at this story too, we notice that there's something really profound going on. Is that in the story, the disciples were rolling across the water. Peter fell down into the water, but Jesus was always where? On top of the water. So what this story shows us is that Jesus is preeminent over all. Even the winds and the waves, Jesus is on top of the situation. He's preeminent over everything. And he used this time of a storm in the disciples' lives not to scare the disciples or to rock the disciples' world, but maybe what seemed to be a storm to the disciples was actually Jesus' way of showing them who he was. And that's what this story tells us. Is that when finances get tough and children's situations come up and there's a lot of maybe issues going on around us and it looks like waves and winds are contrary, we're going through the water. We might sink in the water, but our God is always on top of it. He's on top of the situation. And the storm in your life right now is simply Jesus' way of showing you, hey, it's me. Won't you come on out here? It's his way of showing us who we are. This is why I love the stories of the Bible. Because, yeah, they're exciting and they're cool, and man, there's a lot of different things. But there's some people in the Bible that are so jacked up, they make Jerry Springer's show look like Andy Griffith. I mean, man, these guys were whack-a-doodle-doo. Sometimes I read the Bible and I think, dang, I thought I was bad. Whew, I'm doing pretty good. So that's why I like the stories of the Bible. And today what we want to do is we want to look at another story. It's found in the book of Numbers, chapter 21, verses 4 through 9. And the name of the story is simply titled, The Bronze Serpent. Now, there's some debate whether the serpent was actually bronze or brass or what it may have copper, but we'll just stick with bronze because I like the name. So, the Bronze Serpent, Numbers 21, verses 4 through 9. So here's what we're going to do. This is what we've been doing, if you haven't been with us, is we're going to read the story. Then we're going to kind of unpack the story, see what it means, and then maybe we can take one or two things and apply it to our life. So here we go. Numbers chapter 21, verses 4 through 9, story time with Pastor Kevin. Here we go. Then they journeyed. Let me give you some backstory. Excuse me. What's going on here is this, is the children of Israel have been delivered out of 400 years of slavery. Their leader Moses, God called him out of being a shepherd in the land of Midian, and he came back. He confronted Pharaoh. There's the ultimate battle, and God wins the battle, which he always does. He sends the 10 plagues. Finally, Pharaoh says, I give up, and he releases the children of Israel into the desert to go to their promised land. They're no longer slaves. They're now free. God is now leading them with a cloud by day and a fire by night. He's proven himself over and over and over again to these individuals. Now we pick up the story. It says, Then they, and that's the children of Israel, they journeyed from Mount Hor by the way of the Red Sea to go around the land of Edom. And the soul of the people became discouraged along the way. And the people spoke against God and against Moses. Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in this wilderness? For there is no food and there is no water here, and our soul loathes this worthless bread. So the Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people, and many of the people of Israel died. Therefore the people came to Moses and said, We have sinned, for we have spoken against the Lord and against you. Pray you that the Lord will take the serpents from us. So Moses prayed for the people, and the Lord told Moses, Make a fiery serpent and set it on a pole. And it shall be that everyone who is bitten, when he looks at the serpent, shall live. So Moses made a bronze serpent and put it on a pole. And so it was, if a serpent had bitten anyone, when he looked at the bronze serpent, he did not die, he lived. This is a crazy story. I mean, this is like, what's going on here? Now, this last week, in looking at this story and studying this story and unpacking this story in my own life, I kept going back to about a year and a half ago. I really studied this story kind of inside and out from my own life, but also for some classes that I was taking. And I had to write a little, like a mini paper, not like a deep theological, college course paper, but I had to unpack this thing and write it in what God was trying to show us in this story. And I looked over my notes and I practiced saying it, and I was like, man, I'm going to get it all jumbled up. So today what I'm going to do is something very different. Today what I'm going to do is I'm going to, instead of telling you what this means, I'm going to tell you, but instead of kind of performing it, hey, so they're walking down through the valley and all of a sudden, boom, I got bit by a snake. Instead of acting it out and walking it out, I decided today I'm just going to read to you my thoughts on this passage of Scripture and what it actually shows us. Who we are, what was going on in this story, and God's big plan for our life. So here we go. The title of this little writing that I did, it's not real long. It's only like maybe 40, 50 minutes long, so you'll be fine. I'm teasing. It's not real long. It's titled this: A Serpent, a Pole, a Savior, a Cross. Many of the stories recorded in the Old Testament are not only historical or allegorical, they are also symbolic of God's ultimate plan of redemption through the death, burial, and resurrection of His Son, Jesus Christ. One such story is recorded in the book of Numbers. The children of Israel had been delivered from slavery out of Egypt, and as God had led them with a cloud by day and a fire by night, they had experienced His love, His patience, and His provision time and time again. In Numbers 21, verses 4 through 9, it records, Then they journeyed from Mount Hor by the way of the Red Sea to go around the land of Edom. And the soul of the people became discouraged all along the way. And the people spoke against God and against Moses. Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in this wilderness? For there is no food and there is no water, and our soul despises this worthless bread that you have given us. So the Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people, and many of the Israelites died. Because of this, the people of God came to Moses and said, We are sorry, for we have sinned. We've spoken against the Lord and against you. Please pray that God will take these serpents away from us. So Moses prayed for the people. Then the Lord said to Moses, Make a fiery serpent and set it on a pole. And it shall be that everyone who is bitten, when he looks at it, shall live. So Moses made a bronze serpent and put it on a pole. And so it was, if a serpent had bitten anyone, when he looked at the bronze serpent, he did not die, but he lived. In this passage, we see that as the children of Israel journeyed through the desert, their soul became discouraged. As their heart began to turn from God, so did their trust. They began to speak against God, complaining about the path that God was leading them down, and complaining about, in their opinion, God's lack of provision. After they began to question God, snakes began to slither their way into the camp, attacking and biting the people. Many that were bitten died, and those that had been attacked but were still alive were in great pain and well on their way to death. Surrounded by snakes and writhing in pain, the children of Israel came to their senses and turned back to God, asking Him for help. God then instructed Moses to place a bronze snake, and representative of the very thing that had killed them, on a wooden pole. And whoever looked upon the snake would be healed and saved from death. This story in Numbers is a symbol of our journey and also our redemption as people. As we journey through this life, it is very easy for our soul to become discouraged. The more we become discouraged, like the children of Israel, our view of God's love, God's protection, and God's provision gets skewed and very out of balance. Our hearts begin to turn against God and not towards Him. And when this happens, so does our trust. And we begin to speak against God, complaining about the path that He is leading us down, thinking that we can do this better on our own. We begin to complain about God's rules, God's guidance, and God's way of provision. Because of this, our hearts turn far from God, and the snake of sin enters into us and bites our very soul, filling us with its venom and poison. Although we are physically alive, our soul lives in torment and death, but like the children of Israel, all hope is not lost, for God has a plan. God always has a plan. In the book of Genesis, we see a perfect utopia, God and man living in harmony, until one day a snake entered into the garden and slithered up a tree. While wrapped around a wooden branch, sin talks to Adam and Eve, tricking them not to trust everything that God said. As they bite into the fruit of the tree, sin sinks its teeth deep into their heart. Their soul is now writhing in pain, and although Adam and Eve are physically alive, they and all humanity after them are spiritually dead. As Jesus, the hero of the Old Testament, walks into the pages of human history, He is well aware of why He has come. One night when a man named Nicodemus comes to Him to discuss how a man can be saved, Jesus speaks to him the words that are recorded in John chapter 3, verse 14. As Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up. Just as the serpent was placed on a wooden branch, just as the bronze snake was placed on a wooden pole, so the Son of God would be placed on a wooden cross. Sin had once hung from a tree in the Garden of Eden to bring death to the world. Now sin would hang on an old rugged cross and bring life to all that receive it. 2 Corinthians 5 states, "For he who knew no sin became sin for us, so that we may become the very righteousness of God." Just as a serpent on a wooden pole once saved the children of Israel from death caused by a snake bite, it would now be the flesh of a Savior that saved humanity from death caused by its own fleshly desires. Romans 8 says, "For what the law could not do in that it was weak through the flesh, God did by sending his own Son in the likeness of flesh on the count of sin. He condemned sin in the flesh." Just as thousands of years before people looked to a bronze serpent to be delivered from a painful death, now all those who look to Jesus are able to lay aside the weights of sin. Hebrews declares, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with patience the race set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. Just as a serpent was placed on a wooden branch, just as a bronze snake was placed on a wooden pole, the Son of God would be placed on a wooden cross." The story recorded in Numbers chapter 21 is more than just history. It's a symbol. It's a foreshadowing of God's plan of redemption. That is what Numbers chapter 21 is about. It's not about some people that got bit by a snake and a bronze thing put on a pole. It's about God. When we read this story of old, we see how God chooses to save us. Now, knowing what this story is about now, that it's about God's plan of redemption, and redemption comes by looking at Jesus on the cross, there's how do we respond to this? When I read stories in the Bible, or when something makes me think, I normally respond by asking questions. I'm a question asker. So to me, in knowing what this passage means now, there's two questions that come to my mind. And the first one is have I looked at Jesus? Have you looked at Jesus and what he did for you on the cross? See, it's an interesting thing to me anyway, is that God always makes the rules. He's preeminent over all. We don't, as people playing in the game, we don't get to make the rules of the game. The rules have already been made. And God made the rules in this situation. The snakes slither in, they bite the people, people start to die. Anybody who's been bitten by the snake is at some point going to die. God comes to the rescue and says, if you want to not die, you have to look at the bronze serpent on the pole. In that moment, they couldn't choose to look at anything else and be free from the snake bite. They had to look at the pole. If they looked at their friend, which I think quite honestly, I would, if I got bit by a snake and my friends are around me, I would want to look at my friends and be like, dang, I just got bit by a snake. Hey, suck this out. I'd be like, come on, help me. And I would look to my friends for help. But in that moment, if they looked at their friends, they would die because they had to look at the pole. They couldn't look at their family. I would want to. If I got bit by a snake and Veronica was there and my kids were there, I'd be grabbing a hold of them. Hey, can you help? Can you go get a doctor? If they looked at their wife, if they looked at their family, they would die. They had to look up at the pole, the serpent on the pole. If they ran to the doctor, hey bud, I just got bit by a snake. Can you help me? Do you got any medicine? Do you have any antibiotics? If they looked at the doctor, they would die. If they had their own home remedy and what they would die. They had to look at the serpent on the pole in order to be saved. And the thing about us as humanity, as individuals living, is that every single one of us have been bitten. We've been bitten by the snake of sin. Just like in the Garden of Eden, he tricked them into trusting in themselves and biting into that apple. When they bit into the apple, they really didn't bite into the apple. The apple was biting into them. And they got bit by the snake that was on the pole. And all of us, man, we've all been bitten, haven't we? And like the people, the children of Israel who've been bitten by a snake, they're crying out for help. Moses, help me. Friends, help me. Family. We want to be free from the bite of this guilt. Doing something stupid and feeling guilty. We want to be free from continually doing something. We know this is wrong. Hey, what the heck? I'll do it anyway. We get tired of this after a while. The older we get and the longer we get, the more the sore hurts. And the more we feel the sting of sin. And we want to be free so bad. So what we do as humans, I can't speak for you, but as humans, what we do is we start to look around for someone to help me. I've been bit. I feel guilty. I do stupid stuff. I don't want to do stupid stuff anymore. I want my life to be better. So we look around. And many times what we do is we look at our friends. And we begin to tell ourselves, if we're kind of jacked up, if you're jacked up, which I don't know when in the room here is, you're all perfect, you're going to church, right? You're fine. But if you're jacked up emotionally, jacked up mentally, jacked up spiritually, you got some heavy weights you're carrying, you've been bit by sin and all this stuff, after a while you want to be good. So you think to yourself, I just need to get some good friends. If I get some good friends that aren't jacked up like me, if I get some good friends, some friends that are smarter than me, some friends that are farther along than me, if I get some good friends, they'll take this bite away. If I could just hang out with some good friends and some good people. So we put our eyes on our friends. And we put our eyes on people. And when we do, we begin to realize, I just need some good friends. And then after a while, you realize, you ain't good. You're not good. Brother, you are more messed up than I am. And we look to our friends to free us from the bite of our guilt, but we realize they are just as guilty as we are. There's no salvation in looking at other people who have been bitten by the snake of sin. We have to look at Jesus on the cross. Sometimes when we're single and we're jacked up, we think, man, if I can just get me a good woman, ooh, man, life's going to be good if I can just get a good woman. If I can just get me a good man. If I can just get married. And guys that are single, like, man, listen, I know I'm messed up. I know I got emotional problems and I got physical problems. I got all these issues. If I could just, man, she's a good girl. She's a great girl. She's a hubba come to bubba girl. I'm attracted to her. She's attracted to me. If I can just get married. If I can just get married, the porn problem will go away. Because I'll be having intercourse with my wife all the time. Every day and twice on Sunday. I mean, it's going to be good. So I won't have any need to fill my desires for other ways. If I can just get married, my porn problem will float away. If I can just get married, then I'll feel so much more secure. And if I feel secure, I won't do the stupid things I've been doing out of my feeling of lack of security. And then we get married and we realize, the problem didn't go away. I still don't feel secure. There's no salvation from the bite of sin in marrying a wonderful human being. It could be a wonderful life. It could be a wonderful marriage, but you cannot be free from the bite of sin and guilt By looking at our spouse, we have to look at Jesus on the cross. Sometimes when we're married, if I can just, I got married, I still got issues, I'm out drinking too much, I'm doing stuff I shouldn't do. Okay, my wife's pregnant, once we have a kid, oh man, I have my little boy now my life's going to change. I'm a dad now, that's it. Old ways are gone. I'm going to draw a line in the sand. I'm not going to do that anymore. Then we do it again. I'm not going to do that anymore. The next thing you know, our kid's 10 years old and I'm not going to do that anymore. Looking to our children to save us and to make us be better dads and make us be better human beings and make us be better women. There's no salvation that comes from a child from the bite of sin. You may smile, you may laugh, you may make good memories, but the sting is still there. Sometimes we say to ourselves, we put our eyes on church. If I can just start going to church, I'll be good now. Man, my life's getting straightened out. I'm going to church, and I'm not cussing as much anymore. Well, I'm still cussing, but not as much as I used to. I'm not drinking like I used to. I'm not doing the things I used to, and I'm better now. But the Bible says that it's grace that we are saved, not of our flesh. It's not of works. And the more that we try and the more that we hear the preacher say, don't do, and here's what you should do, we look to church to set us free, and all we get is more rules and regulations and to-do lists, which makes us feel more guilty. And after a while, we're like, screw it, why should I even try? And we end up leaving altogether because there's no salvation that comes from sin from simply looking at church and morality. This story in Numbers completely shows us that Jesus Christ is the way. He is the truth. He is the life. No man comes to the Father. No one gets set free from the bites of sin unless through Him. So the first question we got to ask ourselves is have I looked at Jesus? Have I set my eyes? Have I set my heart on Jesus and the finished work of Jesus on the cross, understanding that Jesus Christ 2,000 years ago took all of my sins, all of my lies, all of my issues, all of my problems, all of my addictions. Jesus Christ took the thing that was killing me and He killed it on the cross. I have to look at what He did in His finished work in order for me to be set free from the thing that's killing me. And when I understand the thing that's killing me, sin, has already been killed on the cross, freedom comes. And I live. So that's the question to ask. It's not me trying hard, you're a good dad, you're a good wife. That's not the question. You can ask that, but that's not going to free you. Have you looked at Jesus? And the answer is no. What are you waiting on? You waiting for the sore to go away? What are you waiting on? You will die in your sins unless you look at Jesus, no matter who we are. That's question number one. And if you have asked Jesus into your heart, and you have put your faith in Jesus and the finished work of Jesus Christ, then the second question is this. The second question is okay, yeah, have I looked at Jesus? Yes, I have looked at Jesus. He's forgiven me of my sins. He's the author and finisher of my faith. I'm putting my eyes on Him. I'm walking towards Him. The things of this world are growing strangely dim, all that stuff. Yes, I'm a Christian. Check that off the list. Now, the second thing is have they looked at Jesus? Think about this. You're one of the children of Israel. Snake just crawled up on you. Another snake on your children, another snake on your spouse, another snake on your father-in-law, another snake on your best buddy that you were playing cards with last night. I mean, it's all around you. And everybody you know, including yourself, has just been bitten by a snake and is going to die. You turn your eyes to Jesus. You turn your eyes to the serpent on the pole. And all of a sudden, you're healed. That's great. But what about your son? Has he looked yet? What about your in-laws? Have they looked yet? What about your buddy at work? Has he looked yet? In that situation, I can imagine as a dad or as a mom or as a friend who's been bitten by a snake and there's snakes all around, and I look at the pole and I get cured. My second thing that I do is say, "Whew, thank you for saving me." My second one is "Hey son, do you look at the pole, man? Hey, buddy at work, no, don't look at her. She can't. Don't talk. No. Look at the pole, brother." I would be running around asking the people who haven't looked at the pole yet. They're looking at the friend, and I'm trying to find a doctor online, and they're doing all these things over here. I say, no. Look at the pole. That's the second thing that has to happen when we ask Jesus into our heart. Is Jesus comes in and he rejuvenates us and he forgives us of the bite and frees us from the bite of guilt and sin. Then we look around and say, who else do I know that is dying of sin? And then we point them not to morality, not to a friend, not to a good story. We point them to the one thing that can free them. Buddy, look at what Jesus did on the cross. Man, that's hard to do, isn't it? But that's where church comes in. At work tomorrow, you're getting paid to do 8 hours of work. You're not getting paid to give 3 points in a poem on why your friends need to give your heart to Jesus. So I understand at work, you got to work. Sometimes it can be awkward. You don't know how to share your story. That's where this comes in. One of the greatest ways to point people to Jesus Christ is by bringing them with you to church at 9, 11, 6, whatever. Bring them with you, because you know as well as I do, if you've came more than 2 weeks to this church, there's one thing and one thing only we talk about, and that's what? Jesus. So one of the best ways to point your friend or point your family, point your dad, point your mom to Jesus is by the way that you're living. Show them that you're forgiven, show them that you're new, and then ask them this question. Hey, you want to go to church with me on Sunday? And if they say yes, at the end of every service, we're going to shine a big old bright light on Jesus Christ on the cross. And we're going to give them a chance to take their eyes and look at Him. So, in closing, the Bible is an amazing, amazing book with so many stories. And over and over and over again, whether it's David and Goliath, whether it's Peter walking on water, whether it's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or whether it's the story of a bronze serpent in the middle of the desert, the hero of the story of the Bible is always Jesus. Because the hero of the story of your life is not you, it's not your friends, it's not the government. I know some are thinking Donald Trump's going to save the world. It ain't Donald Trump. It's Jesus Christ. Have you looked at Jesus? And then have they? Two of the most important questions in the history of the world.
Hey, thank you so much again for joining us tonight at the Church at Visalia online campus. This next Sunday here at the church, we're going to be celebrating Father's Day with an event called Dad Fest. For more information on Dad Fest or some of the other things going on here at the Church at Visalia, visit our website at welcometothechurch.com. Have a great week.